Tonight's broadcast, our featured story of a 13-year-old boy who survived in the Canadian wilderness for almost a year. Brian was on his way to visit his dad in a mining camp in northern Canada. The plane's pilot had a stroke and the plane went down in a lake. Brian was the only survivor. For the remaining days of summer, Brian survived on fish, berries, and small game. He had some tools with him on the plane, along with a survival kit and hatchet. He had a knife, some dry food, waterproof matches, a compass, and a rifle. By the time fall arrived, Brian had made a hut for shelter, a bow and arrow, and he had plenty of wood he chopped with his hatchet. He had learned some of his survival skills from the TV shows he watched with his dad. But when winter came, Brian was not prepared. He now faced some severe challenges that really tested his survival skills and instincts. Besides staying warm, Brian had to learn new ways to hunt in the snow. He created snowshoes, winter clothing from the animal pelts. He had to make a larger and stronger bow with flint-tipped arrows. We have Brian and his mom with us tonight here in the studio on Satellite TV. They will be sharing some of their experiences during the days that Brian was missing. Let's start with Brian. Brian, can you give us some details about how you survived out there all alone?
At first it wasn't so bad because the weather was so nice. I had all the fish I could catch and all the berries I could find. I got really good at killing rabbits and birds too.
Were you scared when no one came to rescue you at first?
Yes, especially at nighttime, because I had no shelter until I built one in the fall when it started to get colder. It took me a while to get used to the sound of the forest and seeing all the little eyes looking at me in the dark.
How did you build a shelter?
First, I had to find some straight sticks. I latched them together using vines I found, and then later, when it got cold, I took mud and mixed it with leaves and twigs and shoved it in the cracks between the sticks. In the winter, I cut a hole in the roof so I could make a fire inside instead of outside, so I wasn't so cold.
What clothes did you have for the winter?
I had no winter clothes with me when I crashed. From there on out, I decided to use the animal skins from all the animals I killed to make rabbit skins, skin vest, and deer skin pants. For thread, I used several little strands of deer hide, and first I burnt the hairs off of them. I used the hide from the dead moose as a sled and as a blanket.
So Brian, what were some of your scariest moments?
My first one was in the fall when a bear attacked me while I was sleeping in my shelter. It ripped my shelter in half and threw me 20 feet. He grabbed the deer meat and wandered off. I was terrified. After that, I made friends with a little skunk that I named Betty. She stayed in a hollow underneath a rock near my hut. Every night, she would come out and I would give her a piece of meat so she wouldn't spray me. That was pretty scary at first. Probably the worst time was when I was hunting and I came upon a huge moose. I was crouching underneath a bunch of pine bushes when I fired my bow and arrow. It pierced it in the chest. Then she charged at me and I didn't have time to set up another arrow, so I grabbed my lance, and just as I did, she ran right into it and keeled over on top of me. She must have weighed half a ton.
How did you get rescued?
One day I was out hunting about 3 miles away from my shelter when I stumbled upon some strange-looking tracks in the snow. I could tell that the animal prints were like a wolf's, but there were ski-like tracks that ran behind the prints. I followed them and turned a corner and was staring at what I thought were wolves, but they were really dogs, Malamutes. They were on chains and were friendly. A Native American guy stepped out of the cabin with a rifle and said to me, "I wondered when you'd be coming by." He was a trapper who flew in by bush plane, who had been trapping the area for 3 years. He lived with his 2 kids and his wife. I lived with them for the next 3 weeks until the supply plane arrived. I left my new friends behind and went home.
Mrs. Robeson, How did you feel about it when you first found out that
I
your
couldn't
son
believe
was
it.
still
Of
alive?
course, after all these months, we began to think the worst had happened, but I never gave up hope. I'm so proud of Brian for surviving all those harsh months. He was so brave about not giving up and being so determined to survive. I guess all those books and TV shows paid off. It'll be a long time before I let him travel alone again.
That's all for tonight's news. But if you want to learn more, stay tuned for the 10 o'clock news at 7 o'clock.